Good evening, everybody. My name is Samantha. Today I'm going to be talking about nuclear power. I'm aware that a lot of people really have a preconceived conception of nuclear power and just often write it off as irrelevant and dangerous, but I believe, and eventually my purpose is to persuade you to believe, that it could be the energy of the future. My title is called Nuclear Power, the Practical Choice, because at the end of the speech, you'll realize why nuclear power is the most energy efficient and upward practical choice for the environment. Its significance to you should be that our world is ever changing with carbon emissions at an all-time high and the ozone layer is depleting. Nuclear power can kind of put a blockade in between us and the inevitable global warming, leaving our world inhabitable, which will continue if we don't break this pattern of burning fossil fuels and don't change to a different source of energy. I've broken my speech down into 3 parts. I'm going to begin by talking about the benefits of nuclear power and versus its competitions and how it compares up with stuff such as hydroelectric power and carbon, such as burning fossil fuels. And I'm going to talk about, for my second point, one of the opposing viewpoints, such as the fear surrounded by nuclear power, and kind of help debunk that stigma that is held around nuclear power. My third point, I'm going to begin to say a little bit about how nuclear power waste can be managed, because I feel like that's very relevant considering how much energy is produced by nuclear power. To begin, many people are not aware and educated about nuclear power and may not know what it can do to save this planet. My first point, nuclear power is one of the most environmentally friendly options versus an alternative such as fossil fuels. Nuclear power is a result of fission, meaning that it's resulted from splitting of an atom, which produces a massive amount of energy, which is contained through nuclear power. The excess energy is a very huge amount, but it also results in no carbon emission versus that of fossil fuels, where you get a relatively smaller amount and much more emissions of greenhouse gases such as carbon that go up into the atmosphere. The only carbon emitted, in fact, is the carbon that is used to build the nuclear power plant. And when I say this, I mean stuff such as construction and mining that's used to build the actual foundation in the building, which will house the nuclear power plant, which is insanely small compared to that of something as like a mining plant or a fossil fuel emission plant. Next, nuclear power produces less radiation than a lot of people believe. It actually produces less radiation than alternative sources of energies. Mining for coal is responsible for a huge amount of release of radiation. You may ask, how is this possible? It's actually because the mining through Earth's crust can bring to surface some radioactive elements such as uranium and thorium, which are, when up close, very radioactive and not contained when you're digging through the Earth's crust. Burning coal also has a leftover product called fly ash. This is not the organic product that gets repurposed and recycled. It's the mineral deposits that's left behind, kind of like a fine substance that can pollute in a much faster rate than the original coal rocks itself. And fly ash is responsible for a huge amount of radioactive releases into the environment. This is according to Yale Environment 365. There are no adverse health effects also of short-term exposure to small amounts of radiation. And this is according to the World Nuclear Association, meaning that the nuclear radiation that is produced from the power plant in small amounts has no pressing or adverse health effects as someone who would be near it, compared to that of what people often associate with nuclear power, such as deformities and immediate health problems. It's really not like that at all. And just a little bit of a statistic just to put in place how much radiation nuclear power actually releases. It's responsible for about 0.1% of the radiation that we experience during our daily lives, which is very small. And this, again, is according to the World Nuclear Association, but the statistic is very tiny compared to that of something such as a chest x-ray or CT scan, which is much higher. And after talking about nuclear power, I'm going to offer you a view from the other side, someone who may be a little bit anti-nuclear power, and help to kind of debunk that fear and stigma that nuclear power is unachievable and just irresponsible. Nuclear power is often associated with many risks and has a very poor public perception. When people think of nuclear power, they think of the 3 Mile Island, the accident in Pennsylvania. They think of Chernobyl, the accident in Ukraine, where lives were lost and the radiation affected many people. Yes, this is true, but a lot of times people don't take into account that the nuclear power plant death rate or accident rate accounts for a very small percentage of all the accident rates compared to the facilities of other opposing energy sources, such as accidents in hydroelectric plants. Accidents in coal mining plants is relatively larger to the accidents in something such as a nuclear power plant, which were kind of 1, 2, 3 time things versus something that's happening constantly. Some statistics to put this into account: Chernobyl death rate is 9 times lower to that of the death rate of liquefied gas. This is according to Yale Environment 360. And the death rate from a nuclear power plant is 45 times lower than the death rate of that of a hydroelectric power plant, meaning that all the lives lost in the combination of all the nuclear power plant accidents is still 47 times lower than all the lives lost in the process of operating and owning a hydroelectric plant, which is a very scary and very clearing fact to help the audience get a very much more clear look on nuclear power and how it's not as dangerous as we all think it is. Next, after talking about the opposing side and kind of debunking the claims, I'm going to be talking about nuclear power waste, because I feel like it is very important. When you're producing massive amounts of energy, you need to look at from the environmental perspective as how will this waste be managed from all this energy you're producing. It's often assumed that nuclear power plants are going to produce large amounts of dangerous, untouchable nuclear waste. This isn't true at all. Nuclear power plants will be able to manage and contain all of its waste. This is done through these steel containers that they put in the ground in their dry casket, and also impenetrable, meaning that the waste inside cannot be touched in any way. This is very helpful because the waste inside of these caskets, their radioactivity diminishes over time. So the more years go by, the less radioactive it becomes. So it being impenetrable, the only time it would ever be open is when the rate of radioactivity has reached an all-time low where it's able to be handled. Compared to other sources of power, nuclear power presents the most aggressive and strategical approach for waste management. Many coal waste is not regarded hazardous at all by the EPA, which may not be entirely true because, as I had said before, when you mine through the Earth's crust, it presents elements such as uranium and thorium, which can be regarded as hazardous by humans and scientists, but not necessarily by the EPA, creating hazardous waste. Only about 44% of coal waste was repurposed and reused, and this is according to a 2007 study by Ground Truth Trekking, compared to virtually all nuclear power waste will be managed and controlled and not dumped. The 44 versus virtually all is a dramatic difference, and when you look at it from an environmental perspective, nuclear power again is on the podium and wins again. And to conclude, I basically just want to reinstate my main points in order to leave you with a lasting impression and a call to action, making you feel inspired to tell the world why nuclear power is the most practical choice. After hearing the pros and cons of instituting nuclear power, it's clear that you may understand now from a better perspective how it's more environmentally friendly in terms of its superior to fossil fuels in areas such as safety and waste management. With some simple researching yourself, hopefully after hearing this speech, you'll be able to debunk your own negative stigma of nuclear power and learn a little bit more about how it's the choice of the future. Thank you.